Welcome to this episode of Rattling the Bars. Today we're going to look at a champion of the death penalty abolishment. Today we have a guest, a special guest. I'm honored, in fact, to have her, Sister Helen Prejean. She's the author of Dead Man Walking, which they made a film out of. She is also the author of several other books. But what's fascinating about her is that she has spent a lifetime as a nun campaigning to abolish the death penalty. So, Sister Helen, thank you for joining me.
Eddie, hey, am I glad to be with you? You're the real thing. You're the real thing, Eddie.
Okay, Sister Helen, give us a little just overview right now of where in the United States the death penalty is. I noticed that there was only a few states that actually overwhelmed the death penalty system. But where's the death penalty being practiced at now in the United States?
Right. This will not surprise you. It's the former Confederate states, the slave states, which have done, since the death penalty was put back in 76, over 70% all actual executions. So where are they taking place now? You look, Texas, of course, Florida, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is just revving up that killing machine again. They just killed John Grant. They have botched 3 executions. They're still killing them. But it's interesting, Eddie, there's only 1.2 counties of prosecutors in the United States that account for almost 50% of the people on death row. But there's a national movement now, as you know, to shut it down. And prosecutors less and less are seeking it. You have more and more prosecutors standing up for conviction integrity units, where they don't just put their spotlight on somebody and go after them, usually poor and can't defend themselves. So, but where it's still happening is in the Deep South and in the states that practice slavery.
Okay, let's step back in time for 1 minute and tell me how you got involved in this. You were a nun. You were, you are a nun. But, decades ago, you were a nun. You were obedient to the church teachings. And what happened? How did you get involved? And how did that evolve?
Well, it's a spiritual awakening, Eddie. Like you say, I've been a nun a long time. And before, what holiness meant as a nun was that you would be obedient to your superiors. And I thought I was never going to make a decision again. But then in the Catholic Church, there was a reform council that happened called Ecumenical Council II in the 60s. And that gave us back selfhood. We were told, look at the signs of the times, get involved in things, inviting us into the hurting people, the injustices. And my congregation, my sisters of St. Joseph, heard that call, and I was part of them that heard the call. When I did, I moved out of the suburbs of New Orleans and moved into the inner city with African American people who became my teachers. That was the first time I heard the words white privilege. That was the first time I heard how different it was for young Black men with a policeman. I wasn't ever scared of policemen, or I got a heavy foot. I got to confess, Eddie, I'm a really honest nun. I got a heavy foot, and I'd done more than my share, of speeding. But I was never scared when a state trooper stopped me. Sometimes we even had a little banter back and forth. Was he taught by nuns? Was he Catholic? Oh, you a nun? I'm going to cut you slack. But every one of the young men at this community meeting, I remember, and this is in the 80s, every one of them had experiences with the police. So this shocked me that it's almost like you could have this other America going on. Then, of course, there was a direct connection between the people in St. Thomas and Angola, our prison. And one day I just got an invitation. It was really casual. Sister Helen, you want to write to a death row inmate? And I said, yeah. And I thought, Eddie, I thought I was only going to be writing letters. I never dreamed I was
Okay.
going to execute him. And 2.5 years later, I was there when the state of Louisiana electrocuted Pat Saunier to death, and it changed my life forever.
And since then, you have been to the Vatican and all over the country campaigning to abolish the death penalty. What has that been like, especially wrestling with the Vatican, who supported the death penalty for 500 years, or maybe
15,
more?
1,500, 1,500.
1500. Okay.
Okay. Like a lot of mainstream uh, Christian faith, they upheld the right of the state to take life. See,
Mhm.
and I knew until we could match and coincide with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that the right to life is an inalienable right, just simply because you're a person. So, therefore, governments don't have the power or authority to give this human right to people for good behavior or take it away for bad behavior. That was the dialogue with the Catholic Church. And because as the people wake up, the leaders wake up. That's true in politics too. It's true about us today. And so you have to educate the people. And what has that experience been like for me these 30 plus years? I've been amazed that when people can get close to what the death penalty really means, because the American people are good people. They're not really for having the government kill people, but they were made to be afraid, and that there are some people that are so evil and so irredeemable. We got to kill them to keep society safe. We can't even put them in prison because they'll kill other inmates because they're evil. And as they began to hear the stories of what happened and how the whole criminal justice system works, it's only poor people who get the death penalty. 8 out of 10, it's because you killed a white person. Almost never when black people are killed unless they're policemen. And and you break it down for the people and you bring them close. I could see that their hearts were good, and they go, "Well, we didn't know it was like that." And that's been that steady, steady education through stories. And the same thing with the Catholic Church and with the people in the churches, talking to them. And then I got a breakthrough. There was a man in Virginia by the name of Joseph Odell, and the Italians had gotten very interested in his case because he was innocent. He's the second story in my book, The Death of Innocence. Pope John Paul heard of him, and I had a direct dialogue with him. And here's what I said. And when I talked to the Pope, it wasn't any different talking to you, because
Okay.
you don't
All
find these
right.
special little
Yeah.
Pope words because you're gonna go talk to the Pope or whatever.
Yeah.
Was I just brought him right inside that execution chamber, and
Mm.
I said, Your Holiness, I talk to a lot of Catholics who say they're pro-life, but when you talk to them, what they really mean, they're pro-innocent life. But they draw a line when somebody's done a crime, they deserve what they get. Can you help us? Can you help the church understand the dignity of each life, even those who have done wrong? And this was my clincher with him. When I brought him in the chamber, I said, When I am walking with a man to execution and his legs are chained and his hands are chained, cuffed really close to his chest, and he's surrounded by 6 guards, and he kind of turns to me and almost in a whisper says, Sister, please pray God holds up my legs while I make this last walk. And I said to the Pope, Where is the dignity in rendering a human being completely defenseless and then, in the most predetermined way you can imagine, killing him? Can you help us do away with the death penalty? And Pope John Paul, in a public address in St. Louis for the first time, said the death penalty is cruel, it's unnecessary, and even those among us who have done a terrible crime have a dignity that must not be taken from them.
From my understanding, you've been in 6 or more actual executions. What is that like? I mean, I've actually, it's funny, not funny,
I know
because
what you
they
mean.
actually tried to kill me. So I was held in the death
Come on.
the gas chamber in Maryland for 3 days
Oh my God.
while they tried to wait to see if I would die. They had broke my shoulder
Oh,
and had did all kinds of damage, and they hid me in the gas chamber, but I was unconscious. So when I woke up in the gas chamber and I seen the place, and that was terrifying.
oh my goodness.
Just laying in there.
Oh my goodness.
Uh,
What year was that, Eddie? What year was that?
that was 1973, July. My
God.
lawyers got a court order and brought doctors in and got me out of there.
Gee.
But it was a horrible place. So what is it like witnessing those executions?
I mean, okay, I just talked to somebody. You talk about the horse's mouth. I mean, you've been in there actually, but I'm going to tell you, it's the most surreal thing. You know, when we did the movie A Dead Man Walking, and
Yeah.
Susan Sarandon was me in the movie, when we were doing the movie and doing the death house scenes, she said, this is so surreal. Because I'm talking like with Pat Saunier, the six, before they're going to their death and they're alive. It's not like being with somebody in a hospital where they got cancer or something and they're going to be dead, but by natural means, fully alive, drinking coffee, talking about how their mama made gravy for the chicken or whatever, and then but the big stuff, and you cannot get your mind around the reality. They are going to kill this man. And believe me, if I let my imagination get ahead of me, I couldn't hold it together. I mean, my prayer was really kind of selfish because I said, please, God, don't let him fall apart. If he falls apart, I'll fall apart. It was unreal. And when I came out, I was traumatized. I threw up, Eddie. It was the middle of the night. See, this is a secret ritual. There have been two court cases trying to make these executions public, and they've both been denied. They don't want this for the people to see this. And the thing that's been the fire in my mission to get to the people is I'm a witness. And when you're a witness to something, you got a moral imperative to tell that story. And that's the way I have felt to each of those men that died like that. And the society's saying, good riddance, nothing but disposal of human waste. And I got an op-ed coming out online in the New York Times, and then I think it'll be in print, of being with a person in the execution chamber. It's around this Ramirez case in Texas, where this man is asking for his pastor to be there with him, to touch him and to pray with him in the execution chamber. And that's been my whole thing. And that's what I wrote about in my op-ed. It's to look in their face and touch them and say, you are not disposable waste. You have a dignity no one can take from you, and to be there for them as the state is killing them. Because before they actually are in that execution chamber, as long as you've been on death row, you get 1,000 signals from guards and everybody that you're worth nothing to this society. You're so evil, we got to get rid of you. Where's the dignity in that?
I'm sure it also dehumanizes the executioner, the guards, the everybody probably except the prosecutor who's trying to become a judge or something. I'm sure it has an impact on those people that has to participate in it.
Yeah, you're right. And you know, we do, Eddie, have more and more people coming forward now that are not doing it anymore. You know, and in Dead Man Walking, I did meet one of the guards, really good guy. He had been a supervisor on death row, and he did all right. And I think he could have retired from Angola, being the supervisor. But then they moved him to what they call the TAC team, the tactical team, which means the execution squad. And then these men that he had gotten to know as he was supervisor, got to know each one. I'm coming in onto death row, and he calls me in his office. He had been through 5 executions close up. And he called me in, said, please just close the door. And we talked, and he said, I can't do it anymore. I come home after these executions. I get my lazy boy chair. I can't sleep. I can't eat. My wife knows not to talk to me because I know I'm killing a human being. We've rendered him defenseless, and I know all their crimes. Some of the crimes they've done, are unspeakable. But I could see the little boy inside them. I could see the human being inside them. And so he quit. He's the only one I met in that whole thing from the governor on down, head of the Department of Correction, who quit because of his conscience.
Mm, 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 mm. It's and I always thought that states or nations that uses the death penalty are harsher on every other level of sentences, life without parole,
Yep.
50 years, 20 years, because it seems like there's a level of violence that the God can perpetrate
Right.
on people
Right.
and dehumanize them. And if that level is death, then everything under that gets gets subjugated. I mean, what you think about, I guess the thing that I want to probably try to find, are there nations or states that don't use the death penalty?
Yeah, 40 years ago, Eddie, there was only a handful. Now it's like the majority of the nations in the world, and the United Nations don't practice the death penalty anymore. I think, well, I'll give my views on why we still do, but I want to comment on what you just said. If you feel you're justified killing a person, so you need to go to the doctor and have a wisdom tooth pulled, or it gives them sanction for any kind of violence, anything less than death, so they break your shoulder. Like there's this woman on death row right now in California. The physician just summarily took her off of her seizure meds. She had a grand mal seizure, falls to the floor, breaks her clavicle. Her clavicle is presently broken. It took a year and a half to see a surgeon in the California prison, and the clavicle had moved and it's above her sternum. You can see it sticking out. They said, too late for surgery. And you got it. It's a mindset where a switch is clicked, not human. Anything you can do under death gets to be tolerated. I think the reason that we still have the death penalty in the United States is racism is still so endemic in every system we have. I mean, we still have it in how you get a house. We still have it in the police, in law enforcement. We still have it in the prison system. And we definitely have it with the death penalty. And look, with the predominance, it's when white victims are killed that there's the feeling that a citizen of value has been lost. If you kill, when black people are killed, look at all these TV things that go on where a white woman got killed, they suspect a boyfriend. They will follow that on national news for weeks or even months. Let a black woman disappear, let a black person disappear. That's never on the national news because we still have a lot of systemic racism in our thinking and in our policies.
Well, that's bothersome for me because I've always thought that America has been founded on white violence against people of color, indigenous,
Right.
Latinos, blacks, etc. And that there's this, it's not just white skin privilege is a fact, but it's almost like everybody else on the planet that's not white less than human beings. And I don't understand that mindset. Is it a case like you were saying early on that you were not aware of the things that was going on down in the projects, down
Right.
on in the black community, because you had been socialized, you had been educated, obviously you went to college, etc. um, so is it a case of just really being socialized that you don't even identify other people as humans, or recognize that they're not
Yeah.
treated as humans?
You know what I found it is, Eddie? I mean, it's kind of a shame it took me so long to wake up. I was 40 when I really recognized, and I lived in in the South and in New Orleans all my adult life, grew up in Baton Rouge. Get this, Eddie, during the Jim Crow days. And we had a woman, Ellen, that worked. We had the big house, big 2-story house, and there was a servant's quarters in the back. And Ellen worked in the house and Jesse worked in the yard. I never knew their last names. And Mom and Daddy were kind, and Daddy helped Ellen and Jesse buy a house. He helped Jesse get a good job, but never questioned the whole Jim Crow system. And I think it's what culture does. And I think what Brian Stevenson says all the time, proximity. Who are the people you meet? And who are the people you're going to lunch with? Who are the people you're talking to? And when people don't meet each other across these divides, it's easy to just buy into the stereotype. I mean, they do that about nuns. Oh, yeah, she's a nun. Boy, she probably hit those kids with a ruler when they didn't know the right answer. I mean, when you're not meeting real people, you can have that stereotype. And then when you're made to be afraid of each other, like immigrants, these rapists, drug dealers coming across our borders, and people are separated, they're not meeting real people, and they're made to be afraid. And that's when the worst comes out in us. When people get close to the truth and they can actually meet people. And I found out the power of a book. Because when you read in a book, see, people are quiet. They're not debating with anybody, but in their imagination, they are coming with me through a terrible crime and feel the outrage. And then they're gradually coming with me into the execution chamber and watch what it really means for the state to kill someone. Since it's such a secret process, you got to have ways of cracking it open and bringing people there.
And I see also that you spend some time working with the victims' families also in terms of bringing them to a better understanding, and some of that work has been successful. With Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. One of the big hypocritical promises that prosecutors make when there's been a murder, they promise that family, almost always it's a white family, very few times a black family, that we're going to get justice for you. I mean, sometimes, Eddie, I've been there for closing arguments at death penalty trials, closing arguments of the prosecutor. The jury's about to go behind these closed doors and decide if a person lives or dies. And there's that prosecutor pointing to that victim's family sitting there in all their grief and saying to the jury, you got to do this for that family. They have a right to have closure. They have a right to have justice. And justice means only one thing. You give back death. He killed. He deserves death. Do that for that family. Well, as people have been waking up in 2011, when the New Jersey legislature was talking about repealing the death penalty, 62 murder victims' families came and testified and said, don't kill for us. The death penalty re-victimizes us. That we're put in this holding pattern. It takes 15, 20 years. I think the average wait for this family to get this so-called justice between the trial and execution, something like 15, 18 years. And they said, and our grief is very public. Every time there's a change in the status of the case, the media is at our door. How do you feel about this? How can we go to a place and grieve and heal and get our life whole again? We never want to hear that person's name again. Even if he goes into prison and we never hear his name. And it's such a ruse that they use to try to justify what they're doing. But boy, did it get exposed in New Jersey, and more it's getting exposed. I didn't heal a lot of victims' families individually by telling them the right thing. What we did was we formed a group of other people who had been through the grief called Survive in New Orleans. And people who have been down that road together can help each other the most. And that's what we did, Eddie.
Okay, all right. And I see how in some cases the Bible has been used by public officials to justify the death penalty. Can you talk a little bit about that and how they use the Bible and why it's taken out of context?
The truth is, the Bible was written over several thousand years, and it's got violence in it. It has psalms where you're praying to God to dash the baby's heads against the rocks of your enemies. It's got violence in it. It does. The thing is about selectively quoting the Bible. The Bible also has in it the compassion of Jesus and the deep spiritual strength of not giving in to hatred and returning violence for violence. That's very, Jesus said, you've heard it said an eye for an eye, but I say to you. And all the deep spiritual traditions have this. Buddhism has it. Hinduism has it. The Quran begins every chapter except one with the mercy of God. Mercy is not tit for tat, eye for eye, life for life. But it can so easily be misquoted. I watched the head of the DA's Association before the Louisiana legislature, before the Judiciary Committee. We had a bill up to repeal the death penalty. This was in the 80s. And he comes not armed with legal briefs. He just opened up the New Testament. He quoted the words of Jesus. As Jesus said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. He lived by the sword, so now he's going to die by the sword. Those kind of what you call proof texting are the easiest things in the world to do. The whole tenor of what Jesus meant and the whole context in which he said that to Peter, who's getting ready to attack one of the Roman guards, like, don't get into a battle of violence you are sure to lose. You're just acting just like him. That was the context. But when you do text without context, proof texting, you can make it. And Justice Scalia, he has died several years ago, but I took him on in the second book, The Death of Innocence. He had a conference on the death penalty in Chicago, was quoting an epistle of St. Paul, Romans, the epistles to the Romans, chapter 13, basically saying that when we impose a law on people, it has the authority of God behind it. And there's a way that people try to justify violence and killing. They want to have God as their ultimate, putting a seal of approval on it, like God is for this. We represent God. We're not a theocracy. We're a democracy. We don't get our authority. We get it from the people. And you have Supreme Court justices using that same thing as Justice Scalia used to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you had some advice to give to the American public about what they can do if they're conscious and interested to help stop this death penalty, put a ban on it nationally, what would you do? What would you say?
Well, a number of things. One is there's a great center where you can just really get real information about the death penalty. It's called DPIC, the Death Penalty Information Center. And I think I'd send them there right after I send them to your show. Because, see, you're the real thing. You have suffered under it. And you know the death penalty is not just a death penalty, that it's the practice of torture. And there's nothing like listening to real people. Send them to people like you who have been in the fire, getting information, and reading books. There's a lot of great books. Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy. Dead Man Walking really does the job of bringing people through the whole thing. Tell them to read books, tell them to get information, tell them to get in touch with podcasts and people that have been on both sides of this and can give them real live experiences. And then in whatever state they're in, if the death penalty is in that state, get involved in ending the death penalty. Because when you're part of a democracy and something that's going on in that democracy that is cruel and torturous and wrong, and you're not involved in ending it and you're silent about it, you're complicit in it. There's no neutral position to take. So to get them off the dime, and the first thing you got to do is get information and educate yourself.
Okay, Sister Helen, I think this has been informative. If we left anything out or if you want to add anything, If not, then we're gonna package this and put it up on air in the near future.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me.
Look, really glad to do it, Eddie. And when they get involved in ending the death penalty, look into what the state is really doing for victims of violence, because the state ought to have a healing role in helping people. The state is supposed to be in charge of the welfare of the people, and the state obviously is not doing that too well, and there's a lot of violence. Not to say it's blaming the state, but what's the healing remedies for victims of violence in their state to work at that too? So thank you, Eddie. It's been a joy.
Okay, thank you too. All right. And thank you for joining this episode of Rattling the Bars.